They tried to hide it. They tried to bury it under centuries of edits, counsels, and translations. But truth has a way of clawing its way back. Today, we rip off the veil and stare evil straight in the eye because you deserve to know the verse that was meant to be yours. The verse that makes the darkness tremble. They tried to hide it, but truth has a pulse. It never really dies, it only waits. For centuries behind closed doors and under the ink of translators, editors, and counsels, a verse was quietly pulled from the pages. A verse that once armed ordinary people with extraordinary authority over evil. The question no one seems to ask is, why delete it? Why erase a string of words unless those words threaten something? The answer's simple, even if it's uncomfortable. Because those words made you dangerous. Dangerous not in the way of violence or chaos, but in the way of awakening. Dangerous because they reminded you that you were never meant to live bowed under the weight of evil, fear, addiction, shame, or oppression. You were meant to rise over it, speak over it, command it to flee. But if you don't know you carry that authority, you never use it. And that's the real strategy of dark, is not just to attack, but to keep you blind. Power was hidden in the unspoken, and the world has become an expert at distracting you from that hidden power. It gives you noise, endless noise, so you never quiet down long enough to hear the missing pieces. And that missing verse wasn't just another beautiful line of scripture, it was a blueprint. It was raw strategy, a reminder that evil doesn't just bow to rituals or ceremonies or polished prayers. It bows to authority. And authority is something that comes alive in you the moment you believe it's yours. Without that knowledge, you fumble in the dark, terrified of shadows that were always beneath your feet. Evil thrives on your ignorance. It doesn't need you to love it. It doesn't need you to participate in it openly. It only needs you to not resist it. And you don't resist what you believe is stronger than you. That's why the erasure of the verse wasn't an accident, and it wasn't small. It was a precise move. Take away the instruction manual and the warrior stays unarmed. But here's the truth they didn't count on. Even when they take away the page, the echo of the verse lingers in the human spirit. It's why you've always felt deep down that you were made for more than survival. It's why something inside you aches when you see injustice or evil go unchallenged. That ache is the sound of a sleeping warrior inside you. The missing verse didn't just teach you to believe, it taught you to speak. That's the part they hoped you'd never figure out. Power was never just in thinking or meditating or quietly hoping for change. Power was in your mouth. The ancient world understood this. They feared blessings and curses because they knew words carry weight, they shape reality. Somewhere along the way, we were trained to forget this. We were taught to silence ourselves, to avoid conflict, to play nice. But the verse called you to the opposite, to speak up, to declare, to command. Because silence in the face of evil is not peace, it's surrender, dressed in religious language. It's time to speak what was stolen. It's time to reclaim what was hidden. You don't need another priest, another guru, another book to tell you it's okay. You already carry the authority they hoped you'd never awaken to. And here's the catch. The verse may be missing on paper, but the power it pointed to has been here all along. It was never locked in a page. It was locked in you. And now you decide what to do with it. Will you keep quiet or will you rise? Will you tiptoe around evil or will you stand and say enough? That is the choice. That is the moment. And that is the power they never wanted you to claim. They tried to hide it, but truth has a pulse. It never dies. It waits. Behind the translations, edits, and polished pages of the Bible we know today, there once lived a verse that burned too hot to leave untouched. It was quietly cut, buried under the weight of centuries, and most people never noticed. But why remove it? Not because it was confusing or outdated, not because it didn't fit the flow of Scripture, but because it gave ordinary people a dangerous edge. Not the kind of danger that breaks windows or starts fires, but the kind that wakes a person up from sleep, the kind that makes them remember they were never meant to crawl beneath the weight of fear or evil. That verse was the blueprint for standing tall in a world designed to shrink you down. And when people understand that evil was never meant to sit on the throne, when they realize the throne was always meant for them, they stop being manageable. They stop settling. That's why the verse had to go. The power was hidden in the unspoken. They knew something most people still don't, that silence kills authority. The verse didn't just contain ideas or comforting words, it carried a war strategy. And the most lethal part of that strategy was the spoken word. See, we were trained to think that real power lives in silence, in quiet prayers, in whispered hopes, but that's not what changes things. Evil doesn't move because you think positive thoughts. It doesn't flinch when you hope for better. It moves when you speak, when you command, when you open your mouth and remind it that it's been trespassing. That's the part they hoped you'd never figure out. That missing verse pointed to the fact that authority lives in your mouth, not just your mind. And the moment you speak what you've been too afraid or too conditioned to say, the ground under evil starts to shake. This is why the verse couldn't stay. It was a loaded weapon in the hands of the public. Evil doesn't need your loyalty to thrive. It just needs your silence. It just needs you to stay in your lane, to keep your head down, to avoid the fight. And when people believe that evil is inevitable, they don't resist it. They endure it. That's the hidden sickness of the world. Not that people are powerless, but that they've been convinced they are. The verse that was removed, it didn't just hand you poetic words. It handed you the instruction manual for rebellion against the darkness, for overthrowing everything inside you and around you that's been whispering you're not enough. Without that verse, we're left to guess, left to feel around in the dark for tools we already possess but don't know how to use. And all the while, evil thrives not because it's strong, but because you've been told you're weak. But here's the truth they didn't count on. Even when they ripped out the verse, they couldn't rip out the truth woven into your spirit. That truth has been humming in you since the beginning, echoing in your bones when you see injustice, when you face oppression, when you battle the same shadows over and over and feel something inside you rise and say, no more. The verse may be missing on paper, but its power has always been waiting in you. And it was never about waiting for someone to give it back. It was about recognizing you never lost it. The question now isn't whether the verse will return to the pages, it's whether you'll return to the fight, whether you'll remember what's been written into you since the start. Will you speak up? Will you push back? Will you stop asking for permission to walk in power you were already born to carry? Because in the end, the most dangerous thing about the deleted verse was never the words themselves. It was what those words awakened in you. And that's the one thing they could never delete. They tried to hide it, but truth doesn't die. It lingers, it waits, it grows restless in the dark. Somewhere along the centuries, behind the counsels and polished translations, a verse was carefully erased. It wasn't a slip of the pen, it was a surgical cut, precise, intentional, and why? Because those words didn't just comfort the broken or inspire the weary, they equipped the powerless. They handed everyday people the blueprint to confront evil without needing a pulpy, a title, or an institution. That verse carried something the world fears, the awakening of ordinary people to extraordinary authority. It wasn't about rebellion against governments or shaking fists at the sky. It was about the quiet revolution inside. The moment when you realize you don't have to bow to fear, shame, addiction, oppression, or any darkness disguised as normal life. That moment is dangerous to systems built on control. That's why the verse had to go, not because it was irrelevant, but because it was too relevant. They buried the verse, but they couldn't bury the hunger. There's a restlessness in every human spirit, a quiet sense that we were meant for more than survival. That hunger gets smothered under noise, endless entertainment, endless busyness, endless distraction. But beneath it all, there's an ache, a knowing, a tension we can't name. That tension is the echo of what was taken. The deleted verse didn't just offer hope, it offered strategy. It was the key to understanding that evil thrives not because it's powerful, but because we allow it to stand unchallenged. And the most threatening part of that verse wasn't about ritual or ceremony. It was about the spoken word. The ancients knew this. They feared curses and blessings alike because they understood that words create, shape, and tear down worlds. Somewhere along the way, we were trained to believe that silence is maturity, that politeness is strength, and that hoping quietly is the best we can do. But the verse cut through that lie. It reminded people that the battle is not just in the mind or heart, but in the mouth. in what we speak, declare, and command. Evil doesn't need to defeat you if it can convince you to stand down. That's the ugly truth most people miss. Darkness isn't interested in turning you into a monster. It's satisfied with keeping you quiet. As long as you believe you have no right to challenge the storm, you'll stay inside, trembling by the window. And that's where the brilliance of removing the verse comes in, because without that piece of the puzzle, you're left with faith that has no fire, belief that has no bite. You're left thinking you're meant to endure, to cope, to survive, rather than to stand, confront, and overcome. That's why they erased it, not because the verse was too big, but because you were. But here's the catch. They can cut it from the page, but they can't cut it from the code written into your bones. That truth has always been there, humming just beneath the surface, waiting for you to stop bowing your head and start lifting your voice. And now the hour is late, but it's not over. This was never about waiting for someone to hand you back a verse or a permission slip. This was about realizing you were never empty-handed. The missing verse is not just some ancient phrase to be recovered, it's a spark. And that spark is already alive in you. The question isn't whether the world will change, it's whether you will change. Whether you will remember what's been echoing inside you all along. Whether you will open your mouth and let the silence break. Whether you will push back against the creeping dark that counts on your passivity. The most dangerous part of the deleted verse was never the line itself. It was the awakening it unleashed. And that awakening is still waiting for you to step into it. The choice is yours. They tried to hide it, but truth has a way of surviving. It lingers in whispers, it stirs in quiet hearts, it waits in the dark corners of human memory. Somewhere between the ancient texts and the polished versions we read today, a verse was carefully removed, not because it was irrelevant, but because it was too potent. This verse didn't just comfort the brokenhearted or offer hope to the weary, it handed the keys of authority to everyday people. It dared to say that evil didn't have the final word, that darkness didn't get to dictate the terms, and that those walking the earth with ordinary names and ordinary faces carried within them something extraordinary. And when people are reminded of that, when they remember they were never designed to bow to fear or evil, they become unpredictable, unmanageable, and unshakable. That's why the verse was taken out, not because it confused, but because it clarified. And clarity is dangerous to systems built on silence. There's an uncomfortable truth most people overlook. Evil doesn't need your love or loyalty, it only needs your silence. It only needs you to believe you have no say in the fight. Without the missing verse, believers are often left with a watered-down faith. A faith that waits, hopes, and endures, but rarely commands or challenges. That's the third key. The realization that your words carry weight. The ancients knew it. They blessed and cursed with their mouths, and they believed those words shaped reality. But somewhere over centuries, people were taught to internalize, to keep everything locked inside, to replace declaration with silent endurance. The deleted verse shattered that lie. It taught that your authority flows through your words, that speaking truth aloud is not arrogance but warfare. And that's what those who erased it feared most. Not that you would read it, but that you would live it, that you would rise and speak with the force you were born to carry. But here's the paradox they never solved. You can remove a line from a page, but you can't remove the fire from the soul. That brings us to the fourth key, awakening. Even without the verse in front of you, its imprint remains in your spirit. That deep sense that you are more than what the world tells you, that you were born to stand in the face of chaos and not crumble, that you were designed not just to survive, but to subdue what tries to rule over you. That has always been there, and no amount of editing can erase it. Every time you resist despair, every time you push back against lies, every time you choose to speak life where death is trying to take root, you embody the very power they tried to strip away. You become the living verse they hoped would stay buried. And now, it all comes down to the fifth key, decision. The truth is, you are not waiting on some counsel or scholar to restore what was taken. The question is whether you will step into what has always been waiting for you. Will you stay quiet, hoping someone else will fix the broken pieces? Or will you rise, open your mouth, and step into the authority they feared you would claim? The missing verse was never about ink and paper. It was about awakening the fighter inside you. And today, the choice is yours. Will you live small, or will you live as the one they tried to silence but never could? They tried to silence this truth, but they didn't count on you showing up tonight. They didn't count on you hearing this message. So here's the question. Will you walk out the same, or will you rise with the power they hoped you'd never find? If you like, I can also help draft the full speech text or help you write the deleted verse itself as a creative piece. Want me to do that?